My name is Sarah Mae Collins, and I've lived in Millbrook, Tennessee my whole life. This small farming town sits nestled between rolling hills where tobacco and corn fields stretch as far as the eye can see. Our main street has 3 stores, a diner, and a church that's older than most folks can remember. Everyone knows everyone here, which means your business becomes everyone's business real quick. The summer heat sticks to your skin like honey, and the only relief comes from sitting on the porch with sweet tea, watching fireflies dance at dusk. It was in this quiet corner of America that my story began, with an old dog that nobody wanted and a lesson about kindness that would change everything. People always said I had too soft a heart for my own good. At 19, I was working double shifts at Murphy's General Store to help Mama with the bills since Daddy passed. My little brother Tommy was only 6 months old then, the surprise blessing that came along just when we thought our family was complete. Mama struggled with postpartum depression, something fierce, leaving me to pick up the slack around our small farmhouse on Willow Creek Road. The neighbors whispered about how I should be out having fun like other girls my age, but they didn't understand that family comes first in our world. I'd rather spend my evenings feeding chickens and rocking Tommy to sleep than worry about what others thought of my choices. That's when Rex wandered into our lives, though nobody called him that at first. He was just that mangy old mutt who showed up behind Lawson's feed store, ribs showing through matted fur and eyes that held more sadness than any creature should bear. The town kids threw rocks at him for sport, and even the adults would shoo him away with harsh words and threatening gestures. But something about that dog spoke to my soul, maybe because we both knew what it felt like to be overlooked and underestimated. When I started leaving scraps for him behind the store, the whole town had opinions about my foolishness, but I'd learned long ago that doing right isn't always popular. The first time I saw him, he was digging through the garbage behind Murphy's store during my lunch break. His golden coat was so dirty it looked brown, and he limped on his left hind leg like he'd been hurt bad and never healed proper. When I approached with half my sandwich, he cowered like he expected a beating instead of kindness. "Easy there, boy," I whispered, crouching down slow so I wouldn't spook him further. His tail gave the tiniest wag, and I knew right then that this dog had love left to give despite whatever cruelty he'd endured. The way he gently took the sandwich from my hand told me everything about his character. Careful, grateful, and desperately hopeful. Mrs. Murphy came out just as I was petting his head. Her face twisted up in disgust like she'd smelled something rotten. "Sarah Mae Collins, what in the Lord's name are you doing with that flea-bitten animal?" she scolded, her hands on her hips in that way that meant business. I explained how hungry he looked, how he wasn't bothering anybody, just trying to survive like the rest of us. But Mrs. Murphy would have none of it, going on about health codes and proper behavior for a young lady. "That dog's probably got rabies or worse," she declared, shooing him away with a broom like he was nothing more than trash. The hurt in his eyes as he limped away broke something inside me, reminding me of how people sometimes treat others they deem worthless. I watched him disappear around the corner, but I couldn't get the image of his grateful eyes out of my mind for the rest of my shift. That evening, I told Mama about the dog while she nursed Tommy in the old rocking chair Daddy had made for her. She was having one of her better days, more present and aware than she'd been in weeks. "Sounds like he needs someone to care about him," she said softly, her voice carrying that gentle wisdom that made me miss the mother she used to be. When I mentioned Mrs. Murphy's reaction, Mama just shook her head sadly. "Some folks think kindness is weakness, baby girl, but they're the ones who are truly weak." Her words gave me courage, and I decided right then that I'd find that dog again and show him not everyone in this world was cruel. Tommy gurgled happily in Mama's arms, almost like he approved of my plan. The next morning I packed extra biscuits and gravy in my lunch pail, hoping to find the dog again. Sure enough, he was back behind the feed store, but this time he wasn't alone. Jake Thornton and his buddies were there with sticks, trying to chase him out of what they called their territory. My blood boiled watching grown men pick on a helpless animal, and I marched right over to give them a piece of my mind. "Y'all leave him be," I shouted, stepping between them and the cowering dog. Jake laughed in that mean way bullies do when they think they've got the upper hand. "Look here, boys, it's crazy Sarah May defending her boyfriend," he sneered, getting his friends to chuckle at his crude joke. But I stood my ground, protecting that dog like he was family because that's what decent people do. "He's not hurting anybody," I said firmly, matching Jake's stare with one of my own. The dog had positioned himself behind my legs, trembling but trusting me to keep him safe. Jake spit tobacco juice dangerously close to my shoes and muttered something about stupid girls and stupid dogs. But when I didn't back down, he and his cowards eventually moved on to find easier targets. I knelt down and offered the biscuits to my new friend, who ate them like they were the finest meal he'd ever tasted. "You need a name, don't you?" I whispered, scratching behind his ears where the fur was starting to show gold underneath the dirt. He looked up at me with eyes full of trust and hope, and I knew right then he'd found his person. From that day forward, I made it my mission to care for this dog nobody wanted. I'd bring him food scraps from home, fresh water in an old mason jar, and sometimes just sit with him during my breaks. He never wandered far from the area, like he was waiting for me to come back each day. The town folks thought I'd lost my mind, wasting time and resources on what they saw as a worthless stray. But this dog had more loyalty and gratitude in his bones than most humans I knew. When I finally decided to call him Rex, after a story Daddy used to tell about a faithful dog, he seemed to understand that he had a name and someone who cared. The way his tail wagged when he saw me coming made every cruel comment from the townsfolk worth enduring. Word spread quickly in our small town about my daily visits to feed Rex. At the post office, Mrs. Henderson made pointed comments about that Collins girl and her obsession with that mongrel. At church, whispers followed me down the aisle about wasting food on animals when there were people in need. Even some of Mama's friends felt obligated to share their unsolicited opinions about my choices. But I'd learned from Daddy that a person's character isn't measured by popular opinion, but by how they treat those who can't help themselves. Rex couldn't speak for himself or fight back against the cruelty of this world, so I became his voice and his protector. The bond we were forming would prove stronger than all their mockery combined. The criticism reached its peak when Preacher Williams mentioned misplaced priorities during his Sunday sermon, though he never said my name directly. Everyone knew who he was talking about, and I felt the weight of judgment from the entire congregation. After service, several church ladies cornered me with their concerns about my unusual attachment to a stray animal. They meant well, they claimed, but worried I was avoiding my responsibilities to my family. What they didn't understand was that caring for Rex had actually made me more compassionate toward everyone, including Mama and Tommy. The unconditional love that dog showed me reminded me daily of what really mattered in life. Their words stung, but they couldn't shake my conviction that kindness is never wasted. Mama's condition seemed to worsen as the summer heat intensified, leaving her more withdrawn and distant than ever before. Some days she'd spend hours staring out the kitchen window at the empty cornfield, Tommy crying in his crib while she seemed lost in her own world of sorrow. The doctor in town had given her pills for the depression, but they made her sleepy and even more disconnected from reality. I found myself taking on more responsibility each day, from feeding Tommy his bottles to doing the laundry by hand in the old washtub on the back porch. The weight of caring for both of them while working full-time was crushing, but I couldn't let our family fall apart when they needed me most. When neighbors offered help, Mama would refuse with pride that bordered on stubbornness, insisting we could manage on our own. The hardest part was watching Tommy reach for Mama during her dark spells, only to have her turn away like she couldn't bear to look at him. He was such a happy baby, always gurgling and smiling, but I could see the confusion in his innocent eyes when his Mama wouldn't respond to his needs. I'd take over, changing his diapers, feeding him, and singing the lullabies Daddy used to sing to me when I was small. Sometimes I'd catch Mama watching us with tears in her eyes, and I knew she hated herself for not being the mother she wanted to be. The guilt was eating her alive, but she couldn't seem to climb out of the dark hole that had swallowed her whole since Daddy's passing and Tommy's difficult birth. Dr. Patterson had warned us that postpartum depression could be severe, especially when combined with grief, but his fancy medical words didn't make living with it any easier. Mama had always been the strongest woman I knew, the one who held our family together through Daddy's long illness and death. Seeing her so broken and fragile scared me more than I wanted to admit, even to myself. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to her cries softly in the next room, wondering if she'd ever be herself again. The responsibility of keeping our little family afloat felt overwhelming for someone barely out of high school, but I'd made a promise to Daddy on his deathbed that I'd take care of them both no matter what. During my lunch breaks with Rex, I found myself confiding in him about my fears and frustrations. He'd sit quietly beside me, his warm presence somehow comforting in ways that human words couldn't match. "I don't know how much more I can take," I'd whisper, scratching behind his ears while tears rolled down my cheeks. Rex would lean against me like he understood every word, offering the kind of unconditional support I desperately needed. Those moments of peace with him became my lifeline, the only time I felt like I could breathe without the weight of everyone else's needs on my shoulders. People mocked me for caring about a stray dog, but he was giving me more emotional support than anyone else in my life. The town's criticism about my attachment to Rex intensified when word got out about Mama's condition. Suddenly everyone had opinions about how I should be spending my time and energy, as if they knew better than me what my family needed. Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary stopped by one afternoon with a casserole and a lecture about priorities, suggesting I focus more on finding Mama professional help instead of wasting time on strays. Her words stung because part of me wondered if she was right, if I was somehow failing my family by caring about anything else. But when I looked at Rex waiting patiently for me each day, I realized that compassion isn't a finite resource. The more you give, the more you have to offer others. The breaking point came on a particularly difficult Tuesday when Mama had one of her worst episodes yet. I came home from work to find Tommy screaming in his crib, his diaper unchanged for hours, while Mama sat motionless at the kitchen table staring at a cold cup of coffee. She looked up at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "I can't do this anymore, Sarah May. I'm failing him, failing you, failing everyone." My heart broke seeing her so defeated, but anger flared up too, anger at the circumstances that had left a 19-year-old girl to manage what felt like impossible burdens. I scooped up Tommy, changed him quickly, and got him settled before sitting down beside Mama to figure out what we were going to do next. That night, after getting Tommy to sleep and helping Mama to bed, I sat on the front porch feeling more alone than ever before. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe or think clearly about the future. In the distance, I could hear Rex's distinctive bark, and somehow that familiar sound brought me comfort in the midst of chaos. I realized then that caring for him hadn't been a distraction from my family responsibilities. It had been practice for the unconditional love they needed from me. The town could mock me all they wanted, but that old dog had taught me lessons about loyalty and compassion that no church sermon or well-meaning advice ever could. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I'd rest in the knowledge that love always finds a way to multiply when you're brave enough to give it freely. The next morning brought unexpected help when Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor, knocked on our door with fresh tortillas and an offer to watch Tommy while I worked. Unlike the others who came with judgment and advice, she simply said, "I've been where your mama is, Mija. Let me help carry the load for a while." Her kindness reminded me that not everyone in town was quick to criticize. Some understood that life sometimes requires us to support each other through the hardest seasons. As I walked to work that day, I felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe we'd find our way through this darkness after all, one day at a time. Over the following weeks, Rex began to transform before my eyes as regular meals and gentle care worked their magic on his battered body. His golden coat started to shine through the dirt and matted fur, revealing the beautiful dog he'd always been underneath the neglect. I'd started bringing an old brush from home to work on his tangles during my lunch breaks, and he'd stand perfectly still, seeming to understand that I was trying to help him look dignified again. The limp in his hind leg improved with rest and proper nutrition, though he'd always carry that slight hitch in his step as a reminder of harder times. Most remarkably, his eyes had regained that spark of hope that cruelty had nearly extinguished, and his tail wagged with genuine joy whenever he saw me coming down the alley. The transformation wasn't just physical. His whole spirit seemed to be healing along with his body. People around town started to notice the change in Rex too, though their reactions varied wildly depending on their character. Some of the kinderfolks, like old Mr. Jenkins who ran the hardware store, would nod approvingly when they saw us together, and occasionally toss Rex a treat from his lunch. But others, particularly Jake Thornton and his crew, seemed almost offended that the dog was looking healthier and happier, as if they'd preferred him broken and defeated. Mrs. Murphy still shooed him away from her store, but I noticed she'd stopped using the broom and her tone had softened just a bit. The children were the most honest in their reactions. Younger kids would point excitedly at the pretty dog, while older ones who'd thrown rocks before now kept their distance with something that might have been shame. Rex seemed to sense who meant him harm and who might offer kindness, staying close to me but showing remarkable forgiveness toward those who'd wronged him. One particularly hot afternoon, I arrived at our usual meeting spot to find Rex had brought me a present, an old tennis ball, dirty and chewed but obviously treasured. He dropped it at my feet with his tail wagging frantically, looking up at me with pure joy in his eyes like he was sharing his most precious possession. We spent my entire lunch break playing fetch in the narrow alley, his awkward gait making his attempts to chase the ball both heartbreaking and hilarious. For the first time in months, I laughed until my sides hurt, forgetting about all the stress and responsibility waiting for me at home. Rex seemed as delighted by my laughter as he was by the game, and I realized he was giving me exactly what I needed without even knowing it. That afternoon marked a turning point in our relationship. We weren't just girl and stray dog anymore. We were companions who brought out the best in each other. Word of our friendship had spread beyond the usual gossips to reach some unexpected ears, including those of Doc Harrison, the elderly veterinarian who'd been treating animals in our county for 40 years. He approached me one evening as I was walking home from Murphy's, his kind eyes studying Rex, who had started following me partway home each day before returning to his territory behind the stores. "That's a fine-looking dog you've been caring for," he said quietly, running experienced hands over Rex's frame while the dog stood calmly, somehow sensing this man's expertise. Doc Harrison pronounced Rex to be a purebred golden retriever, probably around 8 years old, with signs of previous abuse but overall good health thanks to my consistent care. "He's got excellent bloodlines," the vet observed, "and more importantly, he's got a heart full of love for the right person. You've done good work here, Sarah May." The revelation that Rex was a purebred rather than a worthless mutt sent ripples through our small town's social fabric. Suddenly some of the same people who'd mocked me were asking questions about where I'd found him and whether I knew his background. Jake Thornton even had the nerve to suggest that maybe Rex should be sold since valuable dogs deserve better than living behind stores. The hypocrisy made my blood boil. These same people had wanted nothing to do with Rex when they thought he was worthless, but now that he might have monetary value, they were interested. I made it clear to anyone who'd listen that Rex wasn't for sale at any price, that loyalty and love couldn't be bought or sold like livestock at market. My fierce protection of him seemed to surprise some folks, but it shouldn't have. By then, Rex had become family in all the ways that mattered. Doc Harrison's pronouncement also brought an unexpected visitor to Murphy's store the following week. A well-dressed woman from Nashville claimed her family had lost a golden retriever matching Rex's description 2 years ago, and she'd heard through some network of dog people that one had been spotted in our area. My heart nearly stopped as she showed me photos of a dog that could have been Rex's twin, describing the distinctive scar on his left ear that matched perfectly. For a moment, I feared I'd lose the best friend I'd ever had, but Rex's reaction to the stranger told a different story. Instead of showing recognition or excitement, he cowered behind my legs just like he had the first day I'd protected him from Jake's gang. The woman's impatience with his fearful response and her dismissive attitude toward his obvious attachment to me revealed more about her character than her expensive clothes ever could. After the woman left empty-handed, muttering about ungrateful animals, I sat with Rex behind the store and tried to process what had just happened. Whether he was her missing dog or just one that looked similar didn't matter anymore. He'd chosen me as surely as I'd chosen him, and that bond couldn't be broken by papers or pedigrees. Doc Harrison had mentioned that Rex showed signs of previous abuse, and the woman's cold demeanor suggested she might not have been the kindest owner even if he had belonged to her once. As I scratched behind his scarred ear, I made him another promise. No one would ever hurt him again as long as I had breath in my body. The town could mock our friendship, strangers could claim ownership, but Rex and I belonged to each other now in the way that only true companions can. That night, for the first time since we'd met, I managed to convince Mama to let Rex sleep on our front porch, where he could be closer to the family that had claimed him as their own. The news that I'd been harboring a valuable dog spread through Millbrook faster than gossip at a church social, and suddenly everyone had opinions about what I should do with Rex. At Murphy's store, customers would corner me during my shifts to share their unsolicited advice, most of it centered around profit rather than compassion. "That dog could bring good money from the right buyer," suggested Mr. Lawson, who owned the feed store where Rex used to scavenge for scraps. Others whispered about legal obligations and rightful ownership, as if love and loyalty were secondary to paperwork and property rights. The whole situation made me sick to my stomach, watching people who'd shown Rex nothing but cruelty suddenly act like they had his best interests at heart. I started keeping him closer to home to avoid the constant stream of well-meaning but misguided advice from folks who'd never shown an ounce of kindness to either of us. Church became particularly uncomfortable as Preacher Williams seemed determined to use my situation as a teaching moment about stewardship and responsibility. His sermons took on pointed references to young people who let emotions cloud their judgment, and the importance of doing right by others, even when it costs us dearly. The congregation would sneak glances at me during these lectures, some nodding in agreement while others looked uncomfortable with the public nature of his criticism. After one particularly harsh service about misplaced attachments, Mrs. Patterson cornered me in the church parking lot to suggest that keeping Rex was selfish when he clearly belonged with people who could provide better for him. Her words stung because part of me wondered if she was right. Was I being selfish by keeping a dog I could barely afford to feed when there might be people with more resources who wanted him? The doubt planted by well-meaning church folks grew stronger when I had to choose between buying Rex proper dog food and getting Tommy the medicine he needed for an ear infection. Mama's condition hadn't improved much, and our savings were nearly gone from all her doctor visits and prescriptions. Standing in the pharmacy with barely enough money for one necessity, I felt the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. The pharmacist, Mrs. Chen, noticed my distress and quietly slipped an extra bottle of ear drops into my bag without charging me, whispering that she understood how hard it was to make impossible choices. Her unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes and reminded me that not everyone in town was quick to judge or criticize. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places, offering grace when we need it most. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching Rex play with Tommy while Mama dozed in her chair, I realized how much joy he'd brought to our struggling family. Tommy would squeal with delight whenever Rex's gentle nose nuzzled his tiny hands, and even Mama would smile slightly when she watched their interactions. Rex seemed to understand that Tommy was precious and fragile, never getting too excited or rough during their play sessions. For the first time since Daddy's death, our house felt like a home again, filled with laughter and the kind of love that can't be bought or sold. The critics in town could question my choices all they wanted, but they couldn't see what I saw every day. How Rex's presence was healing our broken family in ways that no amount of money or professional help had managed to achieve. The pressure from town reached its peak when Jake Thornton and his friends started a cruel campaign to rescue Rex from what they called my poverty and neglect. They'd make loud comments whenever they saw us together, suggesting that I was being cruel by keeping a valuable dog in less than ideal conditions. Jake even went so far as to report me to the county animal control, claiming I was unable to provide proper care for Rex. When Officer Martinez showed up at our door, I was terrified they'd take Rex away, but his inspection revealed a healthy, well-loved dog who was obviously devoted to our family. "I've seen real neglect," he told me quietly as he petted Rex. "And this isn't it. Don't let them bully you into giving up something good." His validation meant more than he could know, especially coming from someone whose job was protecting animals from actual abuse and neglect. The false report to animal control was the last straw for some of the decent folks in town who'd been watching the harassment with growing disgust. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a group of neighbors to speak up in my defense, reminding everyone that kindness and love were more important than money or status. Doc Harrison publicly stated that Rex was receiving excellent care and was obviously thriving in his current situation. Even Mrs. Murphy, who'd initially been so hostile to Rex, admitted that he'd never caused any real problems and that my dedication to caring for him showed good character. The tide of public opinion began to shift as people realized that the real issue wasn't whether I was fit to care for Rex, but whether the town was fit to judge someone for showing compassion to a creature in need. The conflict came to a head during the annual Founders' Day celebration when Jake made the mistake of trying to physically remove Rex from my side while I was working the church's food booth. Rex, who had always been gentle and submissive, suddenly showed a protective side I'd never seen before, positioning himself between Jake and me with a low growl that left no doubt about his intentions. The crowd that gathered to watch expected me to back down as usual, but something had changed in me too. Months of caring for Rex had taught me about loyalty and standing up for those you love. "He's not going anywhere," I declared loud enough for half the town to hear. "And neither am I. We're family now, and family protects each other." The respect in Rex's eyes as he looked back at me confirmed what I'd known all along. Some bonds are stronger than blood, forged in kindness and sealed with unconditional love. As autumn painted the Tennessee hills in brilliant reds and golds, Rex became increasingly integrated into our daily family routine, though he still spent most nights sleeping on the front porch rather than inside the house. Every morning he'd be waiting by the steps when I left for work, and every evening he'd follow me partway home before returning to his territory behind the stores. Mama had started acknowledging his presence with gentle pats and the occasional kind word, a small but significant step forward in her healing process. Most remarkably, Tommy had begun reaching for Rex whenever he saw him, his tiny face lighting up with pure joy at the sight of his golden friend. The bond between baby and dog was something magical to witness, reminding me daily that love recognizes no boundaries between species when hearts are open and willing. Rex seemed to understand his role as protector and companion to our vulnerable family, never straying far when Tommy was outside and always alert to any potential dangers. The change in Mama became more pronounced as she watched the interactions between Rex and Tommy, something about their innocent connection awakening the maternal instincts that depression had buried so deeply. She started talking to Rex in the same gentle voice she'd once used with me as a child, and I'd catch her sneaking him extra scraps from dinner when she thought I wasn't looking. "He's good with the baby," she observed one evening as we watched Rex patiently let Tommy grab handfuls of his fur without complaint or reaction. For the first time in months, Mama's eyes held a spark of interest in something beyond her own pain, and I realized that Rex was working healing magic on our entire family. The old dog who'd been rejected by the whole town was becoming the bridge that would help us find our way back to each other. Rex's intelligence became more apparent as he learned the rhythms of our household and adapted his behavior accordingly. During Tommy's nap times, he'd lie quietly by the crib, somehow understanding that silence was required. When Mama had her difficult days, he'd stay close but undemanding, offering comfort through his mere presence without adding to her stress. Most impressively, he seemed to sense when I was overwhelmed with responsibility, appearing at my side with his tennis ball or simply pressing against my leg until I took a moment to breathe and center myself. His intuitive understanding of human emotions went far beyond typical dog behavior, suggesting a wisdom born from his own experiences with hardship and recovery. The town had seen him as worthless, but Rex possessed an emotional intelligence that made him invaluable to our healing family. The first real test of Rex's loyalty came during a severe thunderstorm in early October that had Tommy terrified and inconsolable despite my best efforts to comfort him. The wind howled around our small house, rattling windows and sending tree branches scraping against the roof with sounds that seemed designed to frighten small children. Mama had retreated to her bedroom, overwhelmed by the noise and Tommy's crying, leaving me alone to manage the situation. Rex, who normally stayed outside regardless of weather, scratched at the front door with such urgency that I finally let him in just as the worst of the storm hit. Without hesitation, He went straight to Tommy's crib and began a low, soothing humming sound I'd never heard from him before, almost like he was singing a lullaby in his own canine way. To my amazement, Tommy's crying gradually subsided as he focused on Rex's gentle sounds and steady presence beside his crib. The baby reached through the slats to touch Rex's nose, and the dog remained perfectly still, allowing the frightened child to find comfort in his warmth and calm energy. When lightning illuminated the room in brilliant flashes, Rex would position himself between the window and the crib, as if his body could shield Tommy from the scary shadows and sounds. By the time the storm passed, Tommy had fallen asleep with one tiny hand resting on Rex's head, and I realized I was witnessing something profound, the formation of a bond that would define both their lives. That night, Rex earned his place as a full member of our family, no longer just the dog I fed behind the store but Tommy's protector and our guardian angel. The morning after the storm brought unexpected visitors in the form of Mrs. Rodriguez and several other neighbors who'd weathered the night worrying about our little family. They'd seen Rex scratching at our door during the worst of the weather, and were curious about how we'd all fared with the baby and Mama's condition. When they discovered Rex inside the house, curled up beside Tommy's crib like a furry sentinel, their expressions shifted from curiosity to something approaching awe. "I've never seen anything like it," whispered Mrs. Jenkins, watching Rex gently nuzzle Tommy's hand as the baby woke up happy and refreshed despite the previous night's chaos. The women exchanged meaningful glances, and I could almost see their opinions about my foolish attachment to a stray dog transforming into respect for the wisdom of love that recognizes no boundaries. Word of Rex's overnight transformation from outdoor dog to family protector spread through town with a speed that only truly significant news achieves in small communities. This time, however, the gossip carried tones of admiration rather than criticism, as people began to understand that Rex wasn't just any dog. He was clearly special in ways that went beyond breed or pedigree. Doc Harrison stopped by later that week to check on how Rex was adjusting to indoor life, and pronounced himself impressed with the dog's obvious devotion to Tommy and our family. "Some animals are born to be companions," he observed, watching Rex demonstrate his newfound ability to open the front door when Tommy cried. "And this one has found his calling." The validation from someone who'd spent decades working with animals meant everything to me, confirming what my heart had known all along about the extraordinary dog who'd chosen to share his love with us. As October deepened toward November, Rex settled into his new role as indoor family member with the grace of someone who'd always belonged there. He'd learned to wipe his paws before entering, to stay off the furniture unless invited, and most importantly, to be Tommy's constant guardian and playmate. Mama began leaving her bedroom more often, drawn by the sounds of baby laughter as Rex performed his gentle antics for Tommy's entertainment. Our house, which had been filled with tension and sorrow for so many months, now rang with the sounds of joy and healing. The town's mockery had been replaced by grudging respect, and I no longer felt ashamed of my choice to love an unwanted dog. Instead, I felt proud of the family we'd become together, broken pieces made whole by the simple power of unconditional love and acceptance. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it challenges that tested our little family's resilience in ways we'd never imagined. The heating bill for our old farmhouse doubled as temperatures plunged, and I found myself working extra hours at Murphy's store just to keep up with basic expenses. Rex had adapted to life indoors with remarkable grace, seeming to understand that warmth was a precious commodity to be shared rather than wasted. He'd curl up beside the old wood stove during the coldest nights, his body heat helping to warm the main room where we'd moved Tommy's crib to save on heating costs. Mama's condition showed slow but steady improvement as she found purpose in caring for both Tommy and Rex, the simple acts of nurturing bringing back glimpses of the strong woman she'd always been before grief and depression overwhelmed her spirit. The bond between Rex and Tommy deepened with each passing day, creating moments of pure magic that reminded us all why love is worth fighting for. Tommy had started crawling, and Rex appointed himself as the baby's personal bodyguard, carefully herding him away from dangerous areas while allowing him the freedom to explore safely. When Tommy would tumble during his crawling adventures, Rex would immediately be there to cushion his fall or gently nudge him back to his feet with encouraging whimpers. The patience Rex showed with an active baby amazed everyone who witnessed their interactions, especially considering his own painful history of abuse and neglect. Watching them together, I often marveled at how healing could flow both ways. Tommy's innocent trust was helping Rex overcome his fear of being hurt, while Rex's steady presence was giving Tommy the security every child deserves. Mama's progress became more noticeable as she took on increasing responsibility for Rex's care, finding in the routine of feeding and grooming him a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life. She'd brush his golden coat while humming old hymns, her movements gentle but sure as she worked through any tangles or burrs he'd picked up during his outdoor adventures. "He's got such intelligent eyes," she'd murmur, and I'd catch her having actual conversations with him about everything from the weather to her worries about our family's future. Rex seemed to understand that Mama needed his patient listening more than anything else, sitting quietly beside her chair while she worked through her thoughts and feelings aloud. Their developing friendship gave me hope that both of them were finding their way back to emotional health through the simple act of caring for each other. The true test of our family's bond came on a bitter February morning when Tommy developed a high fever that wouldn't respond to any of the usual remedies. Mama, who'd been making such good progress, immediately fell back into panic mode, her hands shaking as she tried to take Tommy's temperature while tears streamed down her face. I called Doc Patterson, but he was dealing with an emergency across the county and couldn't get to us for several hours. Rex seemed to sense the crisis and took up position beside Tommy's crib, his usual playful demeanor replaced by intense alertness and concern. When Tommy's breathing became labored, Rex began a soft whimpering that seemed to call us to action, refusing to leave the baby's side even when I tried to coax him away with food or treats. The hours that followed tested every ounce of strength and faith our family possessed, as we took turns holding Tommy and monitoring his condition while waiting for medical help. Rex maintained his vigil throughout the ordeal, occasionally placing his head gently on the crib rail as if checking on his young charge. When Tommy's fever finally broke just before Doc Patterson arrived, Rex's tail wagged for the first time all day, somehow sensing that the crisis had passed. The doctor pronounced Tommy out of danger but warned that without Rex's alert behavior drawing our attention to the baby's distressed breathing, the outcome could have been much worse. "That dog knew something was seriously wrong before any of us did," Doc Patterson observed, scratching Rex behind the ears with newfound respect. It was the first time I truly understood that Rex wasn't just our pet. He was Tommy's guardian angel in golden fur. The crisis brought our family closer together in ways I hadn't expected, with Mama stepping up to help nurse Tommy back to health while Rex maintained his protective watch. She began talking more about the future, making plans for spring planting and discussing Tommy's upcoming first birthday with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since before Daddy's death. "We're going to be okay," she told me one evening as we watched Rex gently play with a recovered Tommy. "All of us together." The confidence in her voice was real, not the forced optimism she'd tried to project during her darkest days. Rex had given us more than companionship. He'd given us hope and purpose, transforming our broken family into something stronger and more loving than we'd ever been before. As winter gradually gave way to spring, our daily routines evolved to include Rex as a full partner in Tommy's care and development. He'd alert us when Tommy needed changing, bring us toys when the baby was fussy, and even learn to fetch specific items like bottles or blankets when we asked. The intelligence he displayed went far beyond typical dog behavior, suggesting a deep understanding of human needs and emotions that bordered on the miraculous. Neighbors who'd once criticized my attachment to a worthless stray now spoke of Rex with genuine admiration, often stopping by just to witness the remarkable bond between dog and baby. "I never believed in that old saying about dogs being man's best friend," admitted Mrs. Murphy, watching Rex carefully guide Tommy away from the porch steps. "But that dog of yours has changed my mind completely." The transformation in our household was so complete that it was hard to remember the dark days when Mama barely spoke and Tommy cried inconsolably while I struggled to hold everything together alone. Rex had become the missing piece that allowed us to function as a real family again, his presence bringing out the best in all of us. Mama's depression lifted gradually but steadily as she found joy in caring for both Tommy and Rex, while I discovered that love multiplied rather than divided when shared among more hearts. Tommy's development accelerated under Rex's patient guidance, the baby learning to pull himself up by grabbing Rex's fur and taking his first tentative steps while holding onto his four-legged brother for support. We were no longer just surviving. We were thriving, bound together by the kind of love that transforms ordinary moments into precious memories. Spring brought new life to our little corner of Tennessee, with wildflowers blooming along Willow Creek Road and the sweet scent of honeysuckle drifting through our open windows. Tommy had celebrated his first birthday with Rex as the guest of honor, the two of them sharing cake while Mama laughed harder than I'd heard since Daddy's passing. Rex had become Tommy's constant shadow, following the toddling boy around our small house and yard with the dedication of a professional bodyguard. Their bond was so strong that Tommy would cry if separated from Rex for more than a few minutes, and Rex would whine pitifully whenever Tommy napped out of his sight. The whole town had come to accept their unusual friendship, with even former critics like Jake Thornton grudgingly admitting that Rex was a pretty good dog after all. Life felt stable and happy for the first time in over a year, but I should have known that peace never lasts long in this unpredictable world. The first sign of trouble came on a warm April morning when Rex exhibited behavior I'd never seen from him before. Instead of his usual calm demeanor, he seemed agitated and restless, pacing around the house and whimpering for no apparent reason. He'd position himself between Tommy and the front door, blocking the baby's path whenever he tried to crawl toward the entrance. When I tried to take Tommy outside to play in the yard, Rex became even more insistent, gently but firmly herding us back toward the house with urgent whines and nudges. Mama noticed it too, commenting that Rex seemed spooked by something, though neither of us could identify what might be causing his distress. His behavior was so unusual that I considered calling Doc Harrison, worried that Rex might be developing some kind of illness that was affecting his temperament. By midday, Rex's anxiety had reached a fever pitch that had all of us on edge. He refused to eat his lunch, instead maintaining a constant patrol between Tommy's play area and the windows facing the road. Every few minutes he'd emit a low growl directed at something only he could perceive, his hackles rising in response to invisible threats. Tommy seemed to pick up on Rex's tension, becoming fussier than usual and clinging to me whenever I tried to put him down. Mama suggested that maybe Rex was reacting to a wild animal in the area. Bears occasionally wandered down from the hills, and coyotes had been spotted near the neighboring farms. But Rex's behavior felt different somehow, more focused and urgent than a simple animal alert. He was trying to communicate something important, but I couldn't understand what he was trying to tell us. The afternoon brought visitors that explained Rex's strange behavior in the most terrifying way possible. A black sedan with out-of-state plates pulled into our driveway, and Rex immediately positioned himself in front of our door with a fierce growl that raised the hair on my arms. Two men in expensive suits emerged from the car, their city clothes and serious expressions completely out of place in our rural setting. The older man introduced himself as Detective Morrison from Nashville Metro Police, while his younger partner flashed a badge and asked if we were the Collins family. My heart started racing as they explained they were investigating a kidnapping case involving a wealthy Nashville family, and their investigation had led them to our quiet corner of Tennessee. The baby who'd been taken was Tommy's age, and they had reason to believe the kidnappers might target other young children in isolated rural areas. Rex's protective instincts went into overdrive as the detectives questioned us about any suspicious activity or strangers we might have noticed in the area. He stayed pressed against my legs, never taking his eyes off the two men while maintaining a low, warning growl that made his feelings about their presence crystal clear. Detective Morrison seemed impressed by Rex's obvious devotion to our family, commenting that smart dogs often sense danger before humans do. They explained that the kidnapping ring had been targeting families with young children in rural communities, taking advantage of isolated locations and limited police presence to snatch victims for ransom. The description of their methods, watching families for weeks to learn their routines, then striking when parents were most vulnerable, sent chills down my spine as I realized how exposed we were living alone on Willow Creek Road. The detectives left us with stern warnings about keeping Tommy close and being alert for any unusual activity, but their visit had shattered the peaceful security we'd built over the past months. Rex refused to relax even after they drove away, maintaining his vigil by the front door while I tried to process the terrifying information we'd been given. Mama gathered Tommy close to her chest, her face pale with the kind of fear that only parents can truly understand. "What if they're already watching us?" she whispered, glancing toward the windows as if expecting to see sinister figures lurking in our yard. The thought that our happy little family might be in danger from people who made their living stealing children was almost too horrible to contemplate, but Rex's behavior suggested that the threat might be more immediate than we wanted to believe. That evening, as we prepared for what would surely be a sleepless night, Rex took up position in Tommy's room with the intensity of a soldier standing guard. He checked every window, sniffed around every corner, and tested every lock with the thoroughness of a professional security expert. When I tried to call him for dinner, he refused to leave his post, accepting food only when I brought it to him in Tommy's room. His dedication was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because I knew he'd protect Tommy with his life, but terrifying because his behavior suggested that the danger was real and present. As darkness fell over our isolated farmhouse, I realized that our peaceful life had been shattered by forces beyond our control, and only Rex's vigilant protection stood between our family and unimaginable horror. The night stretched endlessly as Rex maintained his silent vigil, his ears alert to every sound while Tommy slept peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding our home. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind in the trees, every distant sound of traffic on the main road made my heart race with fear. Mama and I took turns checking the locks and peering through curtains, but Rex never moved from his position beside Tommy's crib, a golden guardian angel watching over the most precious thing in our world. By morning, I understood that our lives had changed forever, and I prayed that Rex's instincts and loyalty would be enough to keep us safe from whatever evil was lurking in the shadows beyond our door. The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety and hypervigilance, as our family adjusted to living under the constant threat of danger. Rex maintained his protective watch over Tommy with unwavering dedication, rarely leaving the baby's side except for necessary trips outside, and even then only after thoroughly checking the perimeter of our property. I'd taken time off from Murphy's store, unable to concentrate on work while worrying about my family's safety, and the loss of income added financial stress to our already overwhelming emotional burden. Mama had retreated somewhat into herself again, not back to the depths of her previous depression, but clearly struggling with the fear that someone might hurt her baby. We'd become prisoners in our own home, afraid to venture out unless absolutely necessary, jumping at every unexpected sound or unfamiliar car that passed our isolated farmhouse on Willow Creek Road. Detective Morrison had called twice to check on us and provide updates on their investigation, but the news wasn't encouraging. The kidnapping ring had struck again, this time taking a 2-year-old from a farm outside Clarksville, confirming that they were indeed targeting rural families with young children. The pattern was becoming clearer. They watched families for several days to learn routines, then struck during moments when parents were most vulnerable or distracted. "Trust your dog's instincts," Detective Morrison had advised during his last call. "Animals often sense things we miss, and yours seems especially tuned in to protecting your family." His words provided some comfort, but they also confirmed my growing suspicion that Rex had been detecting surveillance we weren't aware of, which meant the danger was closer than we'd hoped. Rex's behavior became increasingly protective as the week progressed, developing new routines that seemed designed to maximize Tommy's safety. He'd escort Tommy to every room, positioning himself between the baby and any windows or doors that might provide access to intruders. During meals, Rex would lie directly beneath Tommy's high chair, alert to any sounds from outside while still allowing the baby to drop food for him to clean up. Most remarkably, he'd started doing perimeter checks of our property every few hours, systematically investigating areas where someone might hide while watching our house. When he'd return from these patrols, his demeanor would tell us everything we needed to know. Tense and alert meant potential danger, relaxed and calm meant we could breathe easier for a while. The crisis came on a Thursday night in late April when Rex's behavior shifted from protective to urgently alarmed in a way that sent ice through my veins. Tommy had been fussy all day, fighting a mild cold that made him cranky and clingy, and Mama had finally gotten him to sleep around 8 o'clock. Rex had been restless since sunset, pacing between Tommy's room and the front windows with increasingly agitated whines that put all of us on edge. Around 10 o'clock, he suddenly froze in the middle of the living room, his head cocked toward the front door and his body rigid with tension. The low growl that rumbled from his chest was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. Deeper and more menacing than his usual warning sounds, filled with a primal fury that made my blood run cold. Without warning, Rex bolted toward Tommy's room with an urgency that had me following before I could think. He positioned himself directly in front of the crib, hackles raised and teeth bared in a display of aggression that would have terrified me if it weren't directed at protecting my baby brother. Through the thin walls of our old house, I could hear what had triggered his alarm, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, moving slowly and deliberately around the perimeter of our home. Mama appeared in the doorway, her face white with terror as she clutched the cordless phone we'd kept close at hand all week. "I'm calling 911, she whispered, but I shook my head, knowing that help was at least 20 minutes away and whatever was happening would be over long before then. We were on our own, with only Rex standing between our family and whoever was stalking us in the darkness outside. The footsteps circled our house twice, pausing at each window as if testing for weaknesses or ways inside. Rex tracked their movement with deadly accuracy, positioning himself to intercept any attempt at entry while maintaining his fierce guard over Tommy's crib. When the footsteps stopped near Tommy's window, Rex's growl intensified to a volume I didn't know dogs could produce, a sound so terrifying and primal that even I felt afraid despite knowing he was protecting us. The silence that followed was almost worse than the footsteps, filled with the kind of tension that comes from predators calculating their next move. 4 long minutes we waited, hardly daring to breathe, while Rex remained coiled like a spring ready to unleash violence on anyone who threatened his family. The first real attempt at entry came at the kitchen window, where someone was quietly working to remove the screen we'd thought was secure. Rex heard it immediately, leaving his post by Tommy's crib for the first time all night to race toward the kitchen with a snarl that shook the windows. The sound of his fury must have startled the intruder, because we heard a crash as someone fell off whatever they'd been standing on to reach the window, followed by cursing in voices that confirmed our worst fears. There were at least 2 of them, and they weren't giving up easily. Rex positioned himself in the kitchen doorway, blocking access to the rest of the house while issuing warning sounds I'd never imagined could come from the gentle dog who played so patiently with Tommy every day. Dawn brought with it a surreal mixture of relief and disbelief as we surveyed the evidence of our nighttime siege. Footprints in the soft dirt around our house confirmed that Rex's warnings had been justified. Someone had indeed been stalking our family with obvious criminal intent. The kitchen window screen had been partially removed and hung at an odd angle, while muddy boot prints beneath Tommy's bedroom window showed where the intruders had planned their attack. Detective Morrison arrived within an hour of my frantic call, his experienced eyes taking in the scene with the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. "Your dog probably saved your lives," he said simply, photographing the evidence while Rex maintained a watchful position between the detective and Tommy. "These guys don't give up easy, but that reception they got from your guardian here must have convinced them to find easier targets." The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of what Rex had protected us from, and the knowledge left me shaking with retroactive terror. The kidnapping ring had been watching our family for over a week, learning our routines and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They'd chosen our house specifically because of its isolated location and what they assumed was our vulnerability: a young single mother, a baby, and an elderly woman with no male protection. What they hadn't counted on was Rex, whose vigilant protection and fierce loyalty had turned their carefully planned crime into a dangerous confrontation they weren't prepared to handle. Detective Morrison found evidence that they'd retreated to a vehicle parked down the road, where they'd apparently argued about whether to make another attempt before deciding the risk was too great with such an alert and aggressive dog on guard. Rex's heroic actions became the talk of Millbrook within hours, transforming him from the town's former outcast into a genuine local celebrity. People who had previously crossed the street to avoid us now stopped by just to see the dog who'd saved a family from kidnappers, bringing gifts of food and toys as offerings of respect and gratitude. Mrs. Murphy arrived with a ham bone bigger than Rex's head, tears in her eyes as she apologized for her previous harsh treatment of both of us. "I was wrong about that dog," she admitted, watching Rex gently play with Tommy despite his exhaustion from the previous night's vigil. "He's got more character than most humans I know, and you showed wisdom beyond your years in caring for him when nobody else would." The validation felt good, but more importantly, it marked a fundamental shift in how our community viewed acts of compassion and the worth of creatures others had deemed worthless. Jake Thornton's reaction was perhaps the most surprising of all, as the man who'd been Rex's biggest tormentor showed up on our doorstep hat in hand, asking for forgiveness with genuine shame in his voice. "I treated that dog something awful," he confessed, unable to meet my eyes as he spoke. "And you too, for caring about him when he needed help. If I'd had my way, he wouldn't have been here to protect your family last night." His words carried the weight of real remorse, and when Rex approached him cautiously but without aggression, Jake knelt down to offer an apology directly to the dog he'd once abused. The sight of that big, tough man apologizing to Rex while tears ran down his weathered face was one of the most powerful moments I'd ever witnessed, proving that redemption is possible when people are brave enough to admit their mistakes and change their hearts. The story of Rex's heroism spread far beyond our small town, attracting attention from newspapers and even a television crew from Nashville who came to film a segment about the wonder dog of Millbrook. Rex tolerated the attention with his usual grace, seeming to understand that his actions had made him famous while never losing sight of his primary responsibility to protect Tommy and our family. The reporter interviewed neighbors and townsfolk who shared their memories of Rex's transformation from unwanted stray to beloved hero, with many admitting they'd learned important lessons about the value of kindness and the danger of judging others too quickly. "This dog is living proof that love can transform anyone," observed Doc Harrison during his interview, "and sometimes the ones we throw away turn out to be exactly what we need most." The national attention brought unexpected opportunities, including offers from dog food companies and publishers who wanted to tell Rex's story to a wider audience. Hollywood agents called about movie rights, and a children's book publisher offered a substantial advance for Rex's biography. While the money would have solved all our financial problems, I knew that Rex's value couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. His worth lay in the love he'd brought to our family and the safety he provided through his unwavering devotion. We declined most of the commercial offers, accepting only a modest deal with a local publisher who promised to donate proceeds to animal shelters throughout Tennessee. Rex's story would inspire others to see the potential in unwanted animals, continuing his mission of proving that every creature deserves a chance at love and belonging. The kidnapping ring was eventually captured thanks in part to the evidence found around our house, bringing justice for multiple families who'd been victimized by their crimes. Detective Morrison credited Rex's protection with providing crucial evidence that helped break the case wide open, noting that the muddy footprints and abandoned tools around our house had led to DNA evidence that connected the criminals to other crimes. During the trial, I testified about that terrifying night when Rex had stood between our family and evil, my words helping to ensure that the criminals received the maximum sentences possible. The judge commented that Rex's actions represented the kind of loyalty and courage that made dogs humanity's most trusted companions, and he formally commended Rex for his service to the community. As summer arrived and life slowly returned to normal, Rex settled back into his role as Tommy's playmate and protector, though with the added respect of an entire community that now understood his true worth. Tommy had started calling him Wex in his baby talk, and the two remained inseparable companions who brought joy and laughter to every day. Mama's recovery was complete now, her confidence restored by the knowledge that our family was strong enough to face any challenge when we stood together. The mockery and criticism from townspeople had been replaced by admiration and gratitude, but more importantly, we'd learned that doing right doesn't require anyone else's approval. It just requires the courage to follow your heart and stand by those you love. Rex had taught us all about the power of second chances, the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, and the truth that heroes often come in the most unexpected packages, waiting for someone brave enough to recognize their worth.